everyone. Good morning to everyone online, and good morning if you're here in the building. My name is Luke. I'm a curate at this church, and when I was growing up as a child in Bristol, the church that I went to with my mum and dad had the 10 commandments displayed at the very front behind the altar. Can we get the slide up? We've got a picture of what my church looked like. There it is. That's the interior of the church that I grew up in. The 10 Commandments are right there. You couldn't miss them. And sometimes when I was in church, my mind wandering, I would read them and I'd think to myself formative questions like, what's adultery? And when I'd come away from church, I'd be a bit confused or unsure about these old words that were literally at the centerpiece of my church, but that no one ever spoke about. So my guess was that they must just be a piece of history that didn't matter anymore. Something that was once important to whichever pious Georgian Bristolians had built the building, but not important now. And ever since, I've had this suspicion around the 10 Commandments that they are a bit irrelevant. Happily, however, we are here at Ascension, partway through a series of talks exploring the 10 Commandments. And we're only 3 commandments in, and I'm really glad to say that my suspicion has already been proven wrong. If you missed them, go back and take a look at Amanda's talk on You Shall Not Covet and Marcus's talk on You Shall Not Murder. Amanda and Marcus have already shown very clearly that these 10 commandments, or 10 words, as the Bible simply names them, are anything but irrelevant. They are alive and kicking, full of God, full of holiness, and just waiting to spill out into our daily lives. And that's why we're studying them. And at the very beginning of this series, I suggested that we can actually best think of them as 10 gifts. 10 gifts. When we come to one of the 10 Commandments, we're not reading a rule, we're opening a gift from God. And today, as we continue, we're going in reverse order, actually, through the 10 Commandments. We reach the 8th commandment. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And so my big question today is, how is this a gift? What is God wanting to give us in these words? You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And the answer that I want to suggest to you today is twofold. God's given this commandment, first, to make you a good speaker. And second, to make you a good creature. To make you a good speaker and to make you a good creature. And if that sounds weird or intriguing, hopefully it will make sense by the end of this morning. But let's get into it first by thinking about what giving false testimony against your neighbor means. Well, it may occur in 2 settings, says St. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century Italian monk and Christian thinker. We've got a lovely photograph of him up here. There are 2 settings. Either, Thomas Aquinas says, in a court of justice or in ordinary conversation. And today I want to focus on that second bit, how this commandment applies to our ordinary conversation. Now, being a unique and analytical mind that he was, Thomas Aquinas dissects this aspect of the commandment into 4 further little bits in a way that I think is very helpful and illuminating. So these are Thomas's 4 ways of bearing false testimony against your neighbor in ordinary conversation. Number 1, detraction. Detraction. That means taking away someone's good name. Basically, when you speak badly about someone, when you use your words to misrepresent them or tarnish their reputation. Detraction is, I think, very simple. To my mind, detraction is talking about the right issue with the wrong people. Talking about the right issue with the wrong people. And it is so easy to slip into. Patrick's on the sound desk today. Should we give Patrick a wave and say, hello, Patrick? He's doing a brilliant job, thank you. Now imagine Patrick stole my croissant one Sunday morning. I am understandably annoyed by this, and I want to do something about it. I want to talk about it, and rightly so, because he's stolen my croissant. This issue is pressing. It's causing me grief. It's the right issue. But what do I do? Well, probably I'm on my phone, and I'll probably text my mum, maybe, or my friend, or my spouse, and I'll say, oh, this guy Patrick, he's just stolen my croissant. I can't believe it. I don't know why he did that. And then my mum or whoever will text back saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe he did that. Shocked cat emoji. Why did he do that? And I'll say, well, I don't know. I guess maybe he just doesn't care about me, or maybe he's just really greedy and has no self-control. Oh, it's so annoying, etc., etc. And before I know it, I'm detracting. I've fallen into detraction. I'm talking about the right issue with the wrong person. So who should I talk to about Patrick stealing my croissant? Who's the right person? Say that a bit louder. Patrick, that is right, Patrick. So Patrick, let's you and me have a chat later. You can explain yourself. He didn't steal my croissant, by the way. Should we give him a round of applause for being on the sound desk? He's never stolen my croissant, actually, just to be clear. But the point is, it's so easy to blow things out of proportion or to dramatize things in the person's absence when Patrick's not there. Especially if you're feeling annoyed or angry, the chances are you'll start dramatizing, telling lies about the person. Even if the basics are true. Say Patrick did in fact eat my croissant, but look where it ended up. I'm accusing him of not caring about me. I'm accusing him of having no self-control. I've started conjecturing. I've started lying. So if you have an issue with a person, talk with the person about it. That is one safe path away from detraction, because the presence of the other person keeps a check on reality. So that's number one. Number two, here's where I think it gets really interesting. Thomas Aquinas says, one may break this commandment by listening to detractors willingly. Listening to detractors willingly. In other words, if you're the one standing there listening as someone speaks ill of another person, you are just as much bearing the false testimony as they are. You are allowing false testimony to be birthed. So stop it. Shut it down. Or in Thomas's words, you ought to turn away, showing a sad and stern countenance. Can we all just practice that for a moment? After 3, let's do a sad and stern countenance. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I can see some sad and stern countenance. So now we know what to do. If someone's detracting, do that face. Or perhaps better, why not say to them, hey, hold on a minute, you're talking to the wrong person. You need to go and talk to them about this. But whatever it is, however it is, Thomas Aquinas says we need to shut it down. It's important that you shut it down, because by willingly listening, silently listening even, to false testimony, you are bearing it. Number 3, this one is simple. The third way of giving false testimony against your neighbor, Thomas says, is repeating what you hear, also known as gossip. Just because you didn't invent the lie, by choosing to enjoy it, by choosing to repeat it, by choosing to savor it, you are just as much lying. Again, you are bearing false testimony. And finally, the fourth type of commandment breakers are, Thomas says, those who speak honeyed words, the flatterers. During COVID, I got a homemade buzz cut. It didn't look that great. People told me it looked really good. Those were honeyed words. And honeyed words, or flattery, is not the same as just being nice to someone or saying nice things. Here at Ascension, we want to be nice to each other. We want to say nice things. We want to deliberately encourage each other with our words and build each other up. That's our culture. That's what we do here. But the difference between encouragement and flattery is that flattery is saying nice things that aren't true. Or, even more subtly and maybe more precisely than that, J. John is a Christian speaker. He puts it like this: flattery is saying something to someone's face that you wouldn't say behind their back. Flattery is saying something to someone's face that you wouldn't say behind their back. So we've got liars, or detractors, sorry. We've got listeners, we've got repeaters or gossipers, and we've got flatterers. And you can see how all of these link together in a pretty horrendous cycle. Because liars or detractors need listeners. Listeners become gossipers. And in an environment where all is lies and gossip, the only thing you have left to say to someone's face is flattery. So consider Thomas Aquinas' diagnosis a warning. It is so easy to slip into this cycle of lies. Bearing false testimony can just engulf a culture and disfigure it. Whether it's an office culture, or a news culture, or a friendship group, or a sports team. All because of giving false testimony, speaking badly of each other. So, a question. Who here is a good speaker? Who here is good at speaking? Okay, great. So, Joe, you can do next week's sermon. Mark, you can do the one after that. And James, you're in 3 weeks' time. Fantastic. Only joking. What I mean by good speaking isn't being able to be eloquent. What I mean by being a good speaker is something a lot more important than that. I'm asking, can you go through a day without detracting someone? Is that you? Are you a good speaker? Well, I've got to tell you actually, Ascension Church, you're good speakers. I've been part of this church for a number of years now, and this picture that Thomas Aquinas paints, it's not you. It's not you. By God's grace, I think I couldn't even count on one hand the number of detraction conversations I've heard or been a part of here at Ascension. You really are good at speaking. You are good at keeping the 8th commandment, Ascension Church. You are. Now, some of you, maybe all of us, may be shuffling in your seat thinking, well, maybe that's the case in this particular environment, in this culture, but actually, I did gossip this morning. Or last weekend, I did flatter my auntie for that hat she was wearing at the wedding. Or on Tuesday, I did sit there and merrily listen as my colleague tore my boss's reputation to shreds. Or whatever it is. I just want to say, don't worry, because remember, this commandment is a gift. God wants to help us in this. God wants to make us good speakers. And so the question is, how to open this gift? How to say no to gossiping completely? How to say no to flattering your auntie's hat once and for all? How to enjoy life as a good speaker? Here's how. I'm going to tell you. It's very simple. Our diocesan bishop, Christopher of Southwark, is the boss. He is my boss. He is Marcus's boss. He is your boss. He oversees the whole 300 or so parishes in Southwark Diocese, including the relatively tiny parish of the Ascension Balham Hill here. And one of Bishop Christopher's principles for life and for working together is this: we speak well of each other. We speak well of each other. If you're on a team with Bishop Christopher, which we are, that's the culture. We speak well of each other. And I think opening up this gift of the 8th commandment is as simple as that. James chapter 3 says this: the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, it sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Serious stuff. I think that's a really good summary of what happens when detraction or speaking badly of each other takes root. Things can really blow up. But if those tiny organs, our tongues, can set life on fire with evil when used badly, imagine what gift, what good thing God is waiting to give when we use our tongues for good. When we speak well of each other. We'll be set on fire, but with holiness. We'll be engulfed, but with love. We'll ignite, but with forgiveness of each other. That fire will grow and spread if we simply speak well of each other. Words from the boss. And words which I think are really in harmony with the gift that is the 8th commandment. You shall not bear false testimony against your neighbor. So there's one way this commandment is a gift. It's God's way of encouraging us, allowing us to be good speakers. People who speak well of each other. And it's one way that God can transform our churches, our communities, and our culture. The second way these words are a gift is that they make you a good creature. You might be thinking, hang on a minute, Luke, what on earth does that mean? What is a good creature? In fact, what even is a creature, Luke? Well, I'm glad you asked. A creature is something that's been created. Christians believe that each bit of stuff in our world is a creature. Whether you're talking about watermelons or wildebeest or wormholes, it's a created thing. It exists simply because God speaks it into being. In Genesis chapter 1, God tells things into existence. God tells things into existence. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let the land produce living things, and there were living things, etc. In other words, God tells the truth so much that when God says something, it happens. It literally starts existing. Or again, today we read John chapter 1, which says, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were created through Him. So the Bible is saying that the reason stuff exists is because God speaks stuff into existence. Reality equals God saying things with His word, and those things becoming real, becoming true. And by extension, all of the stuff, all of the creatures that God speaks into being tell the truth as well. God tells the truth, and God's stuff tells the truth too. Just think for a moment about any bit of stuff you like. Maybe a star, or a nice mountain, or a dog. It doesn't lie. It simply is what it is. It can't help but truthfully tell forth what it is simply by existing. There is this basic fact that the universe tells the truth. Some philosophers call this intelligibility. The universe is intelligible. It makes sense. It's a universe where you can trust that the sun will rise tomorrow, where you don't have to worry about one day leaning up against a tree and then suddenly your shoulder falls into the tree and you're stuck there. Because you can trust that the sun is going to be the sun, and you can trust the tree to be a tree. The universe tells the truth. It is what it is. This also means that it's a universe where you can do science, where you can do experiments and repeat them, and they'll have similar results, which means you can form reliable theories about the way that things work. Because this universe of stuff is authentically, reliably itself. It's like the ideal of every magazine self-help column or Instagram influencers page. It owns its truth. Our universe owns its truth and lives it out every day without compromise. St. Maximus the Confessor was a monk in the 7th century. We've got a slide of him as well. And I promise that this is my second and final monk of the morning. There's Maximus. And Maximus was inspired by the language of John chapter 1 that we read this morning. And he puts this fact about the intelligibility of the world. He puts it like this. He says, every created thing, every creature has a word. A little bit of God's speech. A bit of God's thought, of God's mind that makes that creature what it is. And that shares in God's big word, capital W, through whom all things were made. So you and me are each a little word. We each have our own unique place in God's imagination, and that's why we exist. That's where we get our truth from. So, funny as it sounds, the reason you should follow the 8th commandment and tell the truth, at least if you're a Christian, isn't because our mum and dads told us to. It isn't even because the Bible told us to. You should tell the truth because you are, at your deepest, most primordial level, true. You are a word spoken by the truth-telling God. That's why you exist. But, as Maximus the Confessor points out, whereas everything else in the universe keeps its word, simply sticks to being truly the thing that God made it to be, humans don't. Human beings are the exception. We are the only things in the universe that can break our word, that can choose to be less than what we are. We slip into shady mock versions of ourselves. We've thought already a bit about giving false testimony against our neighbors, about detraction. But what about when the neighbor is you? When others are telling you false things about who you are? Or when you're telling yourself false things about who you are? Think of the lies that we lessen ourselves with. Think of the teenager trapped in kind of permanent sadness because they can't reach whatever standard of success or popularity or beauty is being offered to them by the world around them, whether it's on social media or anywhere else. Think of any black person in the UK today who is statistically 3 times more likely than the average citizen to experience homelessness because of a thick web of lies about skin color that informs our culture. Or think of the person suffering from anxiety, with everything in their body, everything in their mind, telling them something's wrong, be worried, be worried. When in fact that's a lie, there's nothing wrong, it's okay, there's nothing to worry about. Or think about the lies and detraction that shape so much of our news and how our news is communicated, and that inevitably come to shape us too. I wish we could just be like watermelons or mountains and just be what we are all the time. Just stick to our divinely spoken word, as Maximus the Confessor would put it. But instead, in so many ways, we live by false testimony. We break our word. I think in the light of all of this more kind of abstract or cosmic or deep level of what the universe is as created by God, in light of all of this, the commandment, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor, becomes seriously profound and seriously liberating. God, our Creator, is commanding you and me to be ourselves and to let our neighbor be themselves. God is commanding us to stop telling lies and thereby be good creatures, just like the rest of the creatures in the world are. God is commanding us to keep our word. Maximus the Confessor recognized that this is not something we can do on our own. The lies that we've tied up ourselves in are extremely knotty, too knotty for us to get ourselves out of. But he also recognized that help has come. Help is here. In John chapter 1, verse 14, it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." That's incredible. The Word of God, through whom all things were made, has come to dwell in our midst in Jesus Christ. So by coming closer to Jesus, the Word, we get more acquainted with ourselves, with our own little word, with Jesus' unique idea of Luke or Tim or Stefan or Alison. Jesus made you. Jesus spoke you into existence with a word, and Jesus knows you best. We're all living lies that other people have told us or that we have told ourselves, false testimony about who we are. But Jesus is the best lie doctor that there is, the best exposer of false testimony. And he's the one who can set you free to be a good creature. So I suggest right now we come to him, the Word made flesh among us. I'm going to invite the band up to come and lead us. We're going to have a bit of time of worship and of praying. And as we prepare to worship and spend time with Jesus, perhaps I can invite you to stand first off. Let's stand together as we prepare to worship. And I'm going to read out a Bible verse that one of our prayer team was led to before the service today. Someone was praying before the service, and they were led by the Spirit to this verse. So I'm just going to read this out as we prepare to worship Jesus. In John chapter 8, verse 31, Jesus said, "If you continue in my word, then you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Jesus said, "If you continue in my word, then are you my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."